Suddenly, there he was, Connecticut's only convicted serial killer, shuffling along surrounded by 3 immaculately dressed prison officers wearing starched shirts, knife-edge creased trousers, and spit and polished boots. He was handcuffed and shackled at the legs, his loose-fitting prison uniform covering a plumpish physique. Michael Ross stands around 5 feet 10 in and weighs about 140 pounds. He appears bookish with his spectacles perched high on the bridge of his nose and is polite. Michael has the intellect. He has a bright intelligence and, with an IQ of 150, became an Ivy League student at Cornell University. He has a fresh complexion with a chubby face, a cheeky smile, and mischievous eyes, giving the impression of a stereotypical all-American, homespun boy. At face value, Michael is very much the boy next door, the type of father might approve of his daughter dating. But, as all fathers know, appearances can be deceptive. In real life, he is a sexual sadist and serial murderer who has raped 6 precious daughters before killing them. During the course of several interviews for this book, he added to his murderous record by confessing, for the first time, to raping and killing 2 other girls and having anal intercourse with the dead body of another. Michael Ross was born in Brooklyn, Connecticut, on the 26th of July, 1961, under the sign of Leo. He was the first of Daniel and Patricia Ross's 4 children, the others being Donna, Kenneth, and Tina. The marriage was a stormy one, and Patricia, a borderline schizophrenic, who would later twice run away from her husband, never hid the fact that she was forced to get married because she became pregnant with Michael. From the outset, her baby was an unwanted child. Family and friends have described Patricia as a woman who could be charming one minute and cold and calculating the next. She had spent time in the state mental hospital at Norwich. A number of people who knew her had witnessed at first hand a volatile, manipulative woman who would take out her resentments on her family, especially Michael, whom she blamed for ruining her life. Michael remembers his mother's mood swings, which all of the children feared. They couldn't understand how she could laugh after making them ill by feeding them bad meat, or why she would ruin her 2 daughters' clothes with a box of dye. Spiteful, vicious, and sadistic, Patricia tried to trick young Michael into shooting his pet dog. After convincing him that it was suffering after a short illness, she even set his mattress on fire on the front lawn because she had caught him masturbating. So by all accounts, Patricia was the mother from hell. Yet the 4 kids loved their mother simply because she was their mom. They grew to accept her mood swings and learned to keep out of her way when she was angry. Like unwanted pets, which return even meager scraps of affection with devotion and loyalty, the children had to love her just to survive. Michael Ross explained this in an audio-taped interview, and the authenticity of his account has been verified by one of his sisters. We had what we called mom drills. The first person up in the morning would go downstairs, while the rest of us kids would wait and be real quiet and listen to what type of reception we'd get from our mother. And if we got one kind of reception, we'd know how to act. And I'll give you an example. See, one day my sister Tina was setting the table, and there was 6 of us in the family, you know. So she opened up the dishwasher to get 6 glasses, 3 in each hand. You know how you do it. You know, the glasses clinked together. My mother went off. She was screaming and yelling, so we knew that was a bad day coming. You just knew how she was, but we loved her. The Ross children had little time for fun and games, and they were even discouraged from having any friends or participating in after-school activities. With these restrictions in place, they had bonded into a tight-knit group for self-preservation and mutual support. Although Michael was alienated because his brother and sisters erroneously believed that he was favored as a mommy's boy. For his part, young Michael was very proud of his father, and the family egg farm business in Brooklyn, Connecticut. Eggs Inc. would become the most important part of Michael's formative years. Indeed, by the age of 10, he had his own set of chores, which included wringing the necks of sick and deformed chicks. Michael was a hard worker, a mixed-up kid who desperately wanted to live up to his father's high expectations of him, while at the same time, he was very much seeking the approval of his schizoid mother and constantly vying for her rare affection. When asked if he was physically abused as a child, he had this to say: "It's hard for me to tell you what was wrong with my family because I don't know anything different. That's how I was raised. I was beaten sometimes, but I don't think that was it. It was more emotional abuse and with my dad when we were beaten, we would have to go out and pick up a stick out of the garage where we had a wood pile. And what you would do was to go out and you couldn't pick one that broke, 'cause if it broke, he'd get pretty mad. But you didn't pick yourself a club. You didn't want to get the hell beaten out of you. And so I had my own stick put away, hidden away in the back so that people coming in to get firewood wouldn't inadvertently take it. But there is something wrong there when a kid goes to the woodhouse and picks up his stick, his own special stick for getting beaten, and he hides it so no one accidentally takes it. And if you got beat, you didn't scream because my father just got madder." Michael loved his parents despite the physical and psychological abuse they handed out, but the effects of such treatment on the developing mind are often irreparable unless drastic countermeasures are taken to remedy the problems. Many psychiatrists and psychologists now generally agree that if contact and interaction with others in a peer group are restricted during the early stages of infant development, the ability to interact successfully at a later stage in life is retarded. That is, the infant and child must experience love and feel valued, or the limbic nuclei in the brain will not develop normally and gross mental abnormalities may result. Children will lose the ability to form emotional attachments with others, or any attachment that does come about may only be superficial, and this abnormality may last for the rest of their lives. Michael Ross certainly had this problem, and it is not surprising to learn that during an FBI study of serial sexual murderers, 53% of the subjects' families had a history of psychiatric problems, 42% of the subjects had been subjected to physical abuse, and 74% had a psychological abuse history. In September 1977, after a period of schooling at the ironically named Killingly High School, Michael's future looked decidedly bright as he drove his car onto the Cornell University campus in Ithaca, New York. He had overcome long odds and was justifiably proud of himself, as only 10% of Killingly High's vocational agricultural (VOAG) students went on to college. Fewer still attended Ivy League schools. At Cornell, Ross enrolled as an animal science major, and he started a course of study that would well suit his ambition to become the third generation to run the family poultry business. This was an obsession with Michael, and for a time, his fraternity brothers even called him the Egg King. Michael joined AgPAC, the Agricultural Student Union Council, and attended the Collegiate Future Farmers of America. He was a student teacher, counselor, researcher, teaching assistant, and a study group leader around this time. Alpha Zeta, one of the two campus fraternities dedicated to agricultural activity, recruited Ross, and he pledged to them in 1977. He lived in the fraternity house throughout his sophomore and junior years with his brothers, who were mostly young men with small-town farming backgrounds. Since his incarceration for serial murder, a number of Michael's old Cornell friends have said that he enjoyed the house, its social life, and the chance to share common interests. His classmates, though, also recall that Michael was a loner, aloof and somewhat arrogant at times. The student body of Cornell was 3 times larger than the entire population of his hometown of Brooklyn, and the campus became a large playground for Michael Ross. Now free from his mother's unpredictable influence, he could do whatever he wanted without fear of reprisal. He literally went crazy with all the fun he was having, plunging headlong into the party life to the extent that he started taking Ritalin 3 times a day to control his hyperactivity. He would continue to use this drug for a further 6 years. He drank heavily and he started to experiment with sex, often sleeping with different girls 4 nights a week. During his first junior year at Cornell, Michael met his first true love, a pretty girl called Connie Young. They met at a party and he walked her home through the moonlight, and they kissed as they watched a team of divers swimming in the shimmering silver water of Beebe Lake. They strolled to the statues of the college's founding fathers, and he explained how they were supposed to move together and shake hands when a virgin passed between them. On this occasion, the statues apparently did not move, for Connie was hotter than a kitchen stove, Michael recalled. Connie remembers Michael as a go-getter and a guy who always liked to be the center of attention. At first, she accommodated this behavior because he seemed a worthwhile prospect. She certainly overlooked his arrogance and constant boasting about his father's egg farm. In Connie's eyes, he was handsome, if just a little nerdy. He was articulate, took her dancing, and dined her out. She remembers that he always had money when he needed it, and for his part, he enjoyed taking her to places to show her off. To everyone who knew them, they seemed the perfect couple, and most were thrilled when they became engaged to be married. For a short period, Connie shared his bed, and then the arguments started. Michael's fraternity brothers threw him out of the house because he was breaking the rules by sharing his room with a female. As a result of this, the couple rented a small apartment where Michael withdrew into himself. The schooling pressure and the demands made by the close relationship with Connie had started to take their effect. Added to this were his parents' escalating marital problems, and these were clouding his judgment over the future, as home issues were never far from his mind. Connie's distress over her lover's change of attitude came to a head when he started to miss classes. She was a dedicated student trying to cram 4 years of education into 3, but Michael Ross seemed to have lost interest, and he started to hang around their apartment all day, watching television and reading pornographic magazines. He changed his major to agricultural economics, and his grades plummeted. He became bone idle, expecting Connie to do all the housework and cooking, and despite the fact that she was exhausted after studying, he demanded sex with her at least 4 times a day. Initially, Connie complied with Michael's demands for fear of rejection. She loved him deeply and even allowed him to have rough sex with her, although it hurt her badly. Then, as the day-to-day events became even more unpleasant, she now started to wonder if marrying Michael was such a good idea at all. He was, she now believed, sex mad and getting worse. With his graduation approaching in the spring of 1981, Michael could not face the prospect of leaving Connie behind at Cornell, and he became even more restless and agitated, withdrawing for much longer periods into a fantasy dream world of his own. Even as a preteen, he had experienced constant fantasies about women when he would take them to what he called a special underground place, where he hid them and kept them so that they could fall in love with him. From juvenile criminal records, it is known that at the age of 15, he molested several neighborhood girls. Now an adult, Michael's fantasies grew more sexually extreme and progressively more violent. During these fantasies, he says that he was always the assailant, and by the time of his graduation, Connie had joined his faceless dream victims. He terrorized his fantasy girls and humiliated them by forcing them to undress and drop to their knees in front of him. Michael gained enormous sexual pleasure and relief from raping his fantasy victims. He savored the sense of domination that accompanied their fear, and he reasoned that he had control over real women too, even though these bizarre thoughts were still locked away inside his mind. Whatever dreadful thought patterns were developing inside Michael's head during that period in his life, it seemed that there was a meeting between his distorted subconscious thinking and the bland reality of everyday life. This is where the two roads met, for not only did Ross overlay the beautiful face of Connie onto his fantasy victims, his demands for kinkier sex from her began to spiral out of all control. Added to this, he masturbated himself raw. Although he did not know it, he was suffering from psoriasis, an abnormally intense and persistent desire in a man for sexual intercourse. In women, the compulsion is called nymphomania. More and more, Michael found himself wandering aimlessly around the campus. He became titillated by stalking female co-eds, staying just far enough behind them to remain undetected. He explained, "This turned me on so much I always had a hard-on." To release this almost uncontrollable compulsion, he had to masturbate ever more frequently, or else tip right over the edge and act out his fantasies in reality. Michael Ross crossed that threshold in April 1981 when he found himself running up behind a co-ed, grabbing her and dragging her into a small copse, where he forced her to act out his fantasy of stripping naked before him and giving him oral sex. After he ejaculated, he ran off into the night, swearing to himself that he would never do such a terrible thing again. Just 3 nights later, he was revisited by the same uncontrollable demons, and, overcome with sexual compulsion, he attacked a second girl. During this assault, he slipped a rope around the student's neck, enjoying the heightened power this form of restraint bestowed on him. The terrified co-ed was like an animal he could control with a quick tug of his hand. Fortunately, someone approached the scene before he raped her, and he fled into the shadows, his sexual frustration still boiling inside him. Michael has said that he firmly believed that these outrageous acts would cease after he left Cornell, and that he prayed that he could last out the final month without attacking anyone else. At the same time, he says he also felt cheated of the ultimate sexual satisfaction which had been denied him during the previous attacks. Weighing up the pros and cons on his mental balance sheet, he said he was compelled to satisfy himself fully at least once before he graduated. But he promised himself that this would have to be the final attack, after which he would never hurt a woman again. On Tuesday, the 12th of May, 1981, Ross stalked a pretty 25-year-old student called Jung-ok 2. He followed the delicate young woman from her class and raped her in a secluded area of the campus. During the attack, she recognized her assailant, and when she told him this, she effectively signed her death warrant. To avoid arrest, Michael now had no option other than to kill her, so he strangled her before throwing the body over a bridge and into BB Lake. A chilling fact of this murder was that during the autopsy, the medical examiner determined that the cause of death was by drowning, indicating that Jung had been alive when she plunged into the icy water. Although Ross has always been suspected of committing this murder, he has never allowed himself to be interviewed by the police. The case was finally cleared up when he admitted to the murder during one of the interviews which form the basis of this chapter. Michael believed that his parents attended his graduation ceremony only for appearance's sake, and he decided from that moment not to return to the family farm. By a stroke of good fortune, despite his poor grades, he managed to land an enviable job in June 1981 with Cargill Inc. of Minnetonka, on the outskirts of Minneapolis. Cargill is an international agricultural business, best known for grain sales, and Ross was employed at one of the company's more modest operations. in Lewisburg, a country town about 30 miles northeast of Raleigh, North Carolina. As a production management trainee in the poultry products division, Michael was taught how to supervise the care and management of 250,000 laying hens. It was a job well suited to him, and by all accounts, his career prospects with Cargill were excellent. During the transitional period between graduation and full-time employment, Michael tried to convince Connie to transfer to the North Carolina University, where he suggested she could complete her studies. Over the preceding months, their relationship had so deteriorated that he was now paranoid about the separation and feared that she would soon be gone for good. Nevertheless, he was secretly hopeful they would marry one day. Connie had ideas of her own, and marriage was no longer one of them. Besides, she was now dating someone else. Then a bomb dropped on Michael's world when he learned over the phone that his mother and father had separated for the third time, with Mr. Ross leaving the family home and business to its own devices. Patricia flew to Lewisburg, and Michael was pleased, if not surprised, to see his mother so quickly after learning the bad news. Mistakenly, Michael thought this visit was a sign that his relationship with his parents might improve. At the very least, he wanted to believe that his mother could keep the egg farm going until he returned home to take charge, if only for his father's sake. This thought was the furthest thing from Mrs. Ross's devious mind, for she had, in fact, come to visit her son for one reason only. She needed Michael to sign over his shares in Eggs Inc. so that she could dispose of the company while becoming rich into the bargain. Having been duped into signing the share transfer, and soon after learning of the true reason behind his mother's impromptu visit, Michael felt that he had betrayed not only his father, but himself. Then life was made even worse when Connie flew to North Carolina with more bad news. For her, the trip was a short one. She explained that she didn't like Michael's parents, and even if he did end up running the egg business, this wasn't exactly her idea of a future. The finality of the relationship hit home on Tuesday, the 25th of August, 1981, when, at Raleigh-Durham Airport, the couple fell into each other's arms, sobbing their farewells. Michael could not bring himself to believe that his relationship with Connie was finished, so he was understandably distraught as he drove back down Highway 401 to Lewisburg. At around 6:30 p.m., he passed through the small town of Rolesville, where he spotted a young woman pushing her 7-month-old child in a buggy along Main Street. Within milliseconds, his uncontrollable sexual urges surfaced again, and after parking his car, Ross ran up to the woman and offered to carry her groceries. Rolesville was a friendly place, with just 353 residents, and violent crime was virtually unknown until Ross drove down Main Street. The young mother, used to such a secure environment, did not hesitate when this helpful and decent young man approached her. She thanked Ross for his offer and passed over the heavy bags. They walked to her home several blocks away, and as they entered the backyard, Ross suddenly dropped the bags, whipped off his leather belt, and threw it over the woman's head. He dragged her into a nearby soybean field, while threatening to smash the baby's head against a tree if it didn't stop crying. This innocent woman now became a repository for the months of Ross's pent-up anger and sexual frustrations. He smashed his fists into her face, and he choked her with the belt, forcing her to her knees to beg for mercy. Then, with his hands tightly clasped around her neck, he ejaculated. After regaining his breath, Ross sat back on the ground with his victim squirming around in front of him. Somehow he felt cheated, for he had wanted to satisfy his perversions by ejaculating as she died, not beforehand. Enraged, acting like a wild animal, he ripped off the woman's clothes, beating her again and again before strangling her with his bare hands, while the baby screamed close by. And as suddenly as he had appeared, Michael Ross vanished. It was over an hour before the woman regained consciousness. Painfully, she crawled across the street to a neighbor who summoned the local police chief, Nelson S. Ross. Officers arrived almost immediately, and roadblocks were set up to the county line, but Michael was long gone. He was not charged with this offense until he was arrested in Connecticut 3 years later. When asked if he recalled the Rollsville attack, Michael said, "I don't really remember her, or any of my victims for that matter. It's like an old black and white movie, a collage of strange faces, that's all. Nope, I couldn't remember this woman if you had showed me her photograph the next day. There was nothing she or any of them could have done when I zeroed in on them. They were dead, all over. That this one lived ain't got nothing to do with me. That she lived, well, that was purely an act of God." When I asked him if the Rollsville victim fought back and tried to escape, Ross said, "Nothing. She could have got away or something, but it never happened. I can't remember. I can't remember any kind of struggling with her or anything like that. I can't remember any kind of fighting at all. I do recall with the Rollsville victim saying that I would smash the baby's head into a tree or a wall. So I would imagine I probably said things equally horrible to the other ones that would make them stop and think, not to do anything." Ross simply carried on his daily existence as if nothing untoward had happened at Rollsville. Then, on Tuesday, the 17th of September, 1981, his parents filed divorce papers at the Windham County Superior Court. A week later, Michael's employer, Cargill, sent him on a field trip to Illinois, where he would visit the Chicago Commodities Exchange. Before this trip was over, Ross would be arrested for the first time. He decided on Monday, the 28th of September, to look over the Cargill operation in LaSalle, which is about 11 miles southwest of Chicago. He rented a car at Chicago's O'Hare International Airport and headed west across the flat central Illinois farm country. Just before 11:00 p.m., an attractive 16-year-old LaSalle girl was walking along a road that threaded through a cluster of houses when she noticed a car slowly creeping past her. She had noted the vehicle several times beforehand, and she was now becoming frightened for her safety. Without warning, the teenager was suddenly grabbed from behind, and a handkerchief was stuffed into her mouth. She was dragged into nearby woods, where the attacker wrapped a belt around her neck and asked her for money. She gave him the 22 cents she had, and when he loosened his belt, she screamed. She was now moments from a terrifying rape when salvation arrived. A woman living nearby had just switched off her television with the intention of having an early night when she heard a noise that made her blood chill. Opening her kitchen window, she heard a gurgling sound and rustling noises in nearby bushes, so she called the police. Luck was now on the teenager's side, even more so because a patrol car was only 100 yards away, and it arrived at the scene in a flash. When Ross saw the beams of police torches illuminating the woods, he hurried back to his car, but this time his luck deserted him. Sergeant Lewis of the LaSalle Police explained how Ross got himself arrested. "What happened is, when we took the girl home, Ross had his car parked on the same street she lived on, and on the way home, she saw the car and said, 'That's the car, that's the car.' And it's so pretty soon we were looking at the car, and he comes up and says, 'What's the problem?'" After Michael's arrest for unlawful restraint, Sergeant Lewis said that he was puzzled by the contradiction between Ross's demeanor and what he had done. "He was real humble," Lewis recalled. "He wouldn't look you in the eyes when you talked with him. He was a very educated and a talented kid. He didn't appear to be the kind of guy who would go out to other towns and do this kind of stuff. He more or less kept his mouth shut, and he was subdued and spiritless when we took him in." The downside of the LaSalle attack was that Ross was fined $500 after pleading guilty, and on Tuesday, the 8th of October, he was fired from his job. On the upside, and with no alternative, he returned to Brooklyn, where he attempted a reconciliation with Connie. Indeed, he was very pleased when she invited him to spend Christmas with her at her parents' home in Vermont. He was even more delighted that they had also been invited to share the new year with his mother in Brooklyn. Unfortunately, the visit to Mrs. Ross was an unmitigated disaster. His mother could not stand the sight of such a beautiful young woman in her house, and Michael was very upset by the fact that his father had been reduced to living in a run-down shed nearby. The hoped-for rekindling of his relationship with Connie failed for the second time, and she went off to Ithaca, New York, to visit a friend. This was the catalyst that precipitated Ross into rape and murder again. 17-year-old Tammy Lee Williams lived with her family on Prince Hill Road, Brooklyn, which was only a mile or so from the Rosses' egg farm. That Christmas, among the gifts from her parents, she received a pocketbook. A free-spirited young woman who had quit high school, she came and went as she pleased, and it wasn't unusual for her walk along Route 6 to visit her boyfriend who lived in Danielson, about 3 miles away. At 10:15 a.m., on Monday, the 4th of January 1982, Tammy left her boyfriend's apartment and started to walk home, after first promising him that she would telephone him to let him know that she had arrived safely. She did not fulfill this promise because she encountered Michael Ross on her journey. He was surprised to see the young woman walking along a busy road on such a bitterly cold day. Seizing the moment which distinguishes the opportunist killer, he parked his car and ran up to Tammy, offering her a lift. When she declined, he dragged her screaming and struggling into nearby woods, where he forced her to strip and get to her knees. He raped and strangled her before hiding the body under a pile of rocks and brush in a swamp. He said it took him all of 8 minutes to throttle her to death because he kept getting cramps in his hands. Each time this happened, he had to release his grip and massage his fingers before finally throttling the life out of her. Tammy's father reported his daughter missing the next day, and on the 6th of January, a motorist found Tammy's pocketbook lying along Route 6 at the junction of Brickyard Road. Michael Ross explained that he had thrown the item out of his car moments before arriving back at his mother's place shortly after the murder. On Saturday, the 30th of June, 1984, he guided police officers to the decomposed corpse of Tammy Williams and said later that she had recognized him and that she pretended to enjoy the violent rape to avoid being killed. He also said that he returned to the corpse several times during the weeks following the murder in order to masturbate over the body. During January and February 1982, Ross's thoughts continually returned to Connie. Acting on impulse, he decided to drive to Ithaca to visit her without prior warning of his intentions. On arrival, he found Connie in bed with another man. He stormed out in a rage and headed south in search of a victim to kill. May Day fell on a Monday in 1982, and Paula Pereira left Valley Central High School early because she didn't feel well. With no money for a bus fare, she started hitchhiking, and she was last seen alive near the Montgomery Auto Shop on Route 211 during the early afternoon. Paula's mother, Christine Canavan, reported her 16-year-old missing to the Crystal Run police later that day. Although Ross has always been the prime suspect in the Pereira killing, there has never been enough evidence available to charge him with her murder, a situation exacerbated by the fact that Ross has refused to be interviewed by the police investigators. This changed when Ross was subsequently interviewed in prison as part of the research for this book. Confronted by me with police documents and a newspaper article, Ross made a full confession on videotape, giving details of the murder that only Paula's killer could have known. The case is now classified as solved. He said that he had seen her walking along Route 211 and had offered her a ride home. At a spot near a marshy wooded area and close to a rest stop, he pulled over and raped his victim before strangling her. He hid the body near a low stone wall and then drove home. His confession closed the file on this murder inquiry. Asked during the interview what Paula had been wearing, he said he could not recall the details and tossed the documents to the floor, saying, "Well, it's just another murder, isn't it?" Ross started work at Croton Egg Farms on Friday, the 5th of March, 1982. The world's largest poultry operation, based in the small town of Croton, northeast of Columbus, Ohio, hired him as a co-supervisor for 30 employees. He was also responsible for 14 hen houses and over 1 million birds. A fellow supervisor, Donald Harvey, remembered Ross, saying, "He was a disaster in the job, and we were planning to fire the guy pretty soon. He was very bossy, and he just didn't relate to you in giving an order. He just didn't know how to come across. He wanted everyone to know that his education was much higher than theirs, and they were hourly workers and high school dropouts." On Sunday, the 25th of April, 1982, Ross spotted Susan Aldrich in a laundromat in Johnstown, a town close to Croton, and followed her home. She was completely unaware that she was being stalked, and he was completely unaware that she was an off-duty police officer. He knocked on her door and told her that his car had broken down and asked if he could use her telephone. As soon as Susan turned her back, he reached over her shoulder, cupped his hand over her mouth to prevent her screaming, and forced her to the floor. She struggled and managed to shout out, saying that her husband was a policeman and that he would be home at any moment. After giving her a severe beating, Ross ran back to his car, ripped a parking ticket from the windscreen, and drove off. Ross's car had been parked close to the laundromat, and it was there that he got the ticket. Police also found a witness who saw him running from the direction of Susan Aldrich's home towards his vehicle, so they put two and two together and traced the owner through the vehicle licensing office. In an act of poetic justice, it was Susan's husband who arrested her attacker. Ross was sacked from Croton Egg Farms on the 3rd of May and bailed to his mother's home before sentencing. While there, he visited a psychiatrist at the Learning Clinic in Brooklyn. He was trying to win a little sympathy from the doctor, who might have influence with the Ohio court. The following month was another disaster for Michael Ross, for although he had returned a number of photographs to Connie, she still had his engagement ring and he wanted it back. However, the day before he turned up to collect it, she set off across country to marry her new boyfriend. When Ross learned of this, he went crazy with anger. But if that slap across the face was hard to take, a family development enraged him even further. Financially, his mother's divorce had paid off handsomely. When Patricia flaunted her new lover before speeding off in her flashy new Cadillac, it was too much for Michael. These emotional setbacks coming so close together were sufficient to set him off on the murder trail again. The last time anyone could recollect seeing 23-year-old Deborah Smith Taylor alive was around midnight on Tuesday, the 15th of June, 1982. She was driving home with her husband when their car ran out of gas on Highway 6, near Hampton, just 8 miles east of Mrs. Ross's home. A state trooper came across the stationary car and drove the couple to a service station in Danielson, where the boyfriend of one of Ross's earlier victims, Tammy Williams, had lived. The trooper recalled that the Taylors were arguing, and that Deborah was so annoyed that she said that she would find her own way home. After leaving her husband to his own devices, she walked across Danielson Town Green to the bandstand, where she gratefully accepted the offer of a ride home from a bespectacled young man who had walked up and spoken to her. 2 hunters discovered the skeleton of Deborah Taylor on Saturday, the 30th of October, in one of the large tracts of woodland east of Route 169 in Canterbury. The spot was less than 10 miles from the Ross's farm. The body was so decomposed that identification was only possible by means of dental records and items of jewelry. During the first week of August 1982, Ross returned to Ohio for sentencing over the assault he had committed 4 months previously. The psychiatrist who had examined him earlier said that Michael was an overachiever and had too much spare time on his hands. In his report, the psychiatrist also suggested that he should find a hobby, such as learning how to fly an airplane. The judge nevertheless packed Ross off to the Licking County Jail, where he would serve a 6-month jail term for the assault on Susan Aldrich. He was ordered to pay a $1,000 fine. Daniel collected his son from prison on Wednesday, the 22nd of December, drove him back to Connecticut, and offered him a place to stay. Michael Ross had misrepresented himself when he applied for work at Croton Egg Farms by declaring that he had never been in trouble with the police, and he did exactly the same thing again in May 1983 when he applied for a job with the Prudential Insurance Company of America. He would become one of the 40 agents selling health, life, automotive, property, casualty insurance, and securities from the company's office in Norwich, Connecticut. With steady money in his pocket, Ross rented an apartment at 58 North Main Street in Jewett City. He settled in, and his landlady remembers him as a decent, smart, and extremely affable young man whom she enjoyed having around her large Victorian-style house. Ross's female work colleagues also took an immediate liking to him. They thought of him as sweet and inexperienced in romance. He dated when the opportunity arose, and when he met recently divorced Debbie Wallace while out canvassing for business, he reasoned that his past problems were well behind him. During this relationship, Ross says he spent a great deal of time masturbating, fantasizing, and stalking women. Some he followed at random. With others, he set out to learn their daily schedules. He slipped into apartments just to watch women undress and get into bed. And he raped once during this time, allowing to his victim to run away. Although he was often out until all hours of the morning, Debbie Wallace was totally ignorant of Michael's perverted behavior. She believed that he would make a good father for her 3 children. However, like Connie, Debbie was stubborn, independent, and strong-willed. She was a spitfire full of energy, and sex with Michael was excellent. Their relationship was volatile, too, and their frequent arguments often ended in physical violence. During Thanksgiving 1983, the couple had a furious fight over dinner arrangements. From the outset, Patricia Ross had never liked Connie, and she didn't approve of Debbie either, so she invited her son for a meal, but refused to extend the invitation to Debbie. Ross did not know what to do. He felt torn between the 2 women, so he and Debbie fought, and the outcome was that he spent the holiday alone. Around the time Ross was learning the insurance business, giving a new meaning to the term, the man from the Prue, 19-year-old Robin Dawn Stavinsky was moving from Columbia to Norwich, where she hoped to find a job that paid enough that would allow her to go to college. In August 1983, she took a job as a switchboard operator at DPM Enterprises. At 9:30 p.m. on Wednesday, the 16th of November 1983, she disappeared after apparently arguing with her boss. Although it was cold and dark, Robin refused a ride from a workmate and, in what proved to be a fateful mistake, decided to walk to her boyfriend's house. That evening, Ross was driving along Route 52 between New London and Norwich when he saw Robin storming along the roadside. He stopped, climbed out of his car, and approached her with the offer of a lift. When she rebuffed him, he became angry and dragged her struggling into a patch of dense woodland just a few hundred yards from the office of the Connecticut State Police Major Crime Squad. Ross had started to strangle Robin as soon as he grabbed her, and by the time he was ready to rape the young woman, she was barely conscious. Ross recalled that by now he was longer excited by the idea of sex, and his satisfaction came about only from the act of killing and by reliving the moment, occasionally driving by the murder scene and masturbating until the body was discovered 8 days later. A jogger running through the grounds of the Uncas-on-Thames Hospital in Norwich found the partially clothed corpse of Robin Stavinsky under a pile of leaves. Police retrieved the remainder of the dead woman's clothing from a river after Ross's arrest. The brutal murder of Robin Stavinsky was to prove a dreadful watershed in Ross's killing career. Previously, he had murdered out of the fear of recognition if his victims survived. However, he had always hoped that one day he would achieve his ultimate sexual thrill, that of ejaculation as his victim's death supervened. So far, the murders had provided him with only part realization of this fantasy. The overwhelming emotions topped up with feelings of power, domination, and the act of murder were there, but he reasoned that Robin Stavinsky had shortchanged him. She had provided him with none of the sickening criteria because she had collapsed limp and helpless as he dragged her into the scrub. Nevertheless, he strangled her and raped her after death. He said later, "I was surprised, you know. It was a pretty good thrill, but not the best." 2 more young women, both 14, disappeared in eastern Connecticut on Easter Sunday 1984. Leslie Shelley and April Brunet, inseparable friends and neighbors in Griswold, had decided to walk into Jewett City. Both girls were aware that their parents would not permit them to walk back during the hours of darkness, so each said that the other's parents had agreed to drive them home. It was this childish deception that would cost them their lives. As darkness fell, the girls phoned their homes. Both were ordered to walk back as punishment. At 10:30 p.m., when neither girl had returned, their distraught parents called the police, who made the initial mistake of listing the youngsters as runaways. The exact time Ross stopped and offered the girls a lift is unknown. It is known, however, that April, who was the more assertive of the two, climbed into the front passenger seat, while the petite and fragile Leslie sat behind. Both were understandably startled when Ross drove right past the end of their street, and despite their protests that he had missed their turning, he wouldn't stop. April pulled out a small pocket knife with which to threaten their abductor, but Ross easily disarmed her. Driving east out on Highway 138, he headed for Voluntown and the nearby beach pond, a vast expanse of water with a dam holding back the Pachow's River, which separates the states of Rhode Island and Connecticut. Parking up at a still undetermined location, Ross tore off April's jeans, cutting them into strips, which he used to bind his victim's hands and feet. He shut Leslie into the trunk of his car and then dragged April a few yards and forced her to her knees. There can be no doubt that the terrified Leslie overheard her friend arguing with Ross. April put up a spirited fight for her life before he raped and strangled her to death. Ross now turned his attention to Leslie. He said later that the girl made a great impact on him. She, Leslie Shelley, was delicate with wispy blonde hair, he stated. She was calm as I talked to her in the car. I told her I didn't want to kill her, and she cried when she found out that her friend was already dead. Yes, I suppose she started shaking and appeared resigned to her fate when I rolled her over. This is the murder that bothers me. I can't remember how I strangled her, but her death was the most real and hardest to deny. With the others, it was like someone else did it, and I watched from afar through a fog of unreality. This was real, but somehow not real. It was fantasy, but not really fantasy. Her death, Leslie, It wasn't someone else, and for the first time I saw it was me. I watched myself do those things and I couldn't stop it. It was like an invisible barrier was between us. I didn't want to kill her. At this point during his interview with me, Ross showed the first signs of stress and remorse. He stopped talking, lowered his head, and sucked in a lungful of stale prison air. When he resumed his sickening account of the murder of Leslie Shelley, there were crocodile tears in his eyes. I couldn't do anything but watch as I murdered her. And you want to know something outrageous? Well, I cried afterwards. You know something else? Well, I don't know, but nobody knows this. Well, I wanted to have sex with her straight after I raped and killed April, but I couldn't get it up. So I had to sit back with Leslie for an hour, just talking and stuff. Then, because she started crying, saying that she would be in trouble for being late home, I had to kill her. But I anally raped her after death to release the tension. You see, nobody has been told this before. Then he smiled sheepishly before adding, you know, they call me a serial killer, right? Well, I've only killed 8 women. Big deal. There are a lot more guys you could meet, and they've killed dozens more than me. And in that context, I'm a nice guy. I'm such a nice guy, really. With that, he burst into an uncontrollable fit of laughter before explaining that he had dumped the bodies of April and Leslie at another location near Beach Pond, occasionally revisiting the site to masturbate over their remains. I'd just sit there just to look at their decomposing bodies like my childhood fantasies. They were there for me and they gave me pleasure when I needed it. Ross took police to the bodies of April Brunet and Leslie Shelley shortly after his arrest on Tuesday, the 28th of June, 1984, although the precise location of the murder scene was never established. This was put down as an oversight by the Connecticut State Police, and later proved in court to be a deliberate attempt by them to avoid a jurisdictional boundary dispute with the Rhode Island law enforcement agencies, who had to foot the bill for this murder inquiry. Ross was now nearing the end of his run. He was mentally out of control, and his work at the Prudential Insurance Company was suffering as a result. Faced with the prospect of dismissal, as he was failing to bring in new business, Michael was also coping with his turbulent relationship with Debbie Wallace, which had taken a more active turn. Debbie's father had died while she and Michael were on vacation, and after the funeral, on the return journey home, they had argued. A major rift followed, and once again, he felt alone and rejected. For 17-year-old Wendy Barabol, Friday, the 15th of June, 1984, was the final day of examinations at Norwich Free Academy, where she was a junior student. She stopped at her mother's home after studies before catching a bus back to Jewett City to visit a convenience store. It was a fine afternoon, so she decided to walk back, and at around 4:30 p.m., she was seen by a passing motorist walking along the fairly busy Route 12. But she was not alone, for other witnesses later came forward to say that she was being followed rapidly by a man on foot. He was about 6 feet tall, white, clean-shaven, of medium build, and had dark hair. Other witnesses saw this man get out of a blue compact car with a rear window wiper, and they recalled that he walked briskly off in the direction of the young woman who answered Wendy's description. When Wendy failed to return home, her mother reported her missing the following day. Hundreds of police and local residents launched a search of the immediate area, and 2 days later, her body was found by a fireman. The corpse was in dense woods and hidden in an ancient stone wall just a quarter of a mile from her home. She had been raped and strangled. Ross explained later that he had intended to go to work that day, but had cut himself while shaving, and blood seeped onto the collar of his only clean shirt. After phoning in with the excuse that he was ill, he dressed himself in smart, casual clothes and hung around his apartment, reading pornographic material and masturbating. At around 2:00 p.m., he went for a drive, and later on he saw Wendy walking along the road towards her home. After swinging his car around and parking up at the entrance of a gravel track, he dashed across the road and asked Wendy if she would like to go to a barbecue that night. When she turned him down, Ross here dragged into a clearing in nearby woods, where he rolled her over onto her stomach before strangling her. He ejaculated almost immediately, so he throttled her again. She struggled and kicked, and her body twitched. Michael had cramp in his hands as he fought to strangle the life out of his victim. When he stopped to massage his fingers, she heaved and squirmed under him until reapplied his grip. Finally, a kick of her legs told him she was dead. Known for disarming suspects using his boyish smile and supportive manner, State Police Detective Mike Malchik has used his investigative skills to crack even the toughest of homicide inquiries, including 40 or more which were considered unsolvable by his colleagues. A legendary figure in Connecticut, the fair, blue-eyed cop often worked alone and unpaid on these jobs. Such was his dedication to law enforcement. The case of Wendy Barabolt was no exception. Mike had already found solid links between the murders of Deborah Taylor and Tammy Williams, and when he placed Robin Stavinsky and Wendy Barabolt into the equation, he knew he was looking for a sexual psychopath and serial killer who would not stop murdering until he was arrested and brought to justice. Mike Malchik's experience in homicide cases was such that he did not need to consult the FBI for advice, but to confirm his belief, he spoke to a colleague at the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime in Quantico, Virginia. Malchik already knew what type of suspect he was looking for. He would be a young, dark-haired Caucasian male in his late 20s or early 30s. He would be of the white-collar type who worked in Norwich, yet lived further south, and this man would frequently travel along Route 12 between his place of work and his home. Griswold was a good bet for the suspect's locus, and now there was the extra bonus of knowing that the man drove a blue foreign make of sedan car. Using what Mike calls basic common sense, he reasoned that whoever had murdered Wendy Barabolt would want to flee the crime scene and get home as quickly as possible. So he reasoned that his target was a local man. He called the vehicle licensing department and asked them for a printout of all vehicles and their owners in the locality. For this service, the VLD charged the police department $12, which proved to be a cheap investigative tool. When the list rolled out of his fax machine, Malchik started looking for a blue foreign make of car. At number 27 on the list was the vehicle owned by one Michael Bruce Ross, who lived in Jewett City. Ross seemed intrigued when Malchik arrived on his doorstep on Thursday, the 28th of June, to question him. He invited the detective in for a cup of coffee and enjoyed the attention of the police. For his part, Mike actually felt that the personable young Ross could not have been a serial killer. As he was about to leave to rejoin his colleague, Detective Frank Griffin, outside in their car, Malchik was asked a question. Ross wondered if such a murderer would be declared insane and escape the electric chair if he was convicted. It was such a pointed question that it prompted Malchik to return to Ross's sitting room. The sleuth knew that the description of a blue car didn't exactly match that of Ross's vehicle, which was parked outside. The cop was looking for a hatchback with rear wipers, and while Ross certainly had a blue Toyota, it was a sedan and had no rear wiper blades. After a few more minutes of general conversation, Malchik got up to leave for the second time. He had only walked a few yards before a gut instinct prompted him to turn around and ask Ross a question of his own. In the manner of television actor Peter Falk acting out his role as Columbo, Mike asked, "What were your movements on Friday, the 15th of June, the day Miss Barabolt went missing?" Amazingly, thought Malchik, Ross immediately reeled off his movements for that day, almost to the minute, with the exception of the hour encompassing 4:30 p.m. This was the time when witnesses had seen Wendy walking along the road with Ross following her. Malchik thought it remarkable that anyone could recall his or her exact whereabouts, along with solid timings 2 weeks after an event. So he reckoned that the 15th of June must have been a special day for Ross. He then asked him what he had been doing on the 2 days either side of this crucial date. Ross couldn't remember a thing, and the detective was stunned, for the implication was now obvious. Ross had tried to alibi himself for the day of the murder, and, in doing so, had proved himself too clever for his own good. Malchik then asked his suspect to accompany him to the nearby murder incident room, which had been set up in the Lisbon Town Hall. Ross thought that a ride in an unmarked police car would be fun, so he changed into a white short-sleeved shirt and dark, lightweight slacks for the 10-minute journey, the very same clothes that he had worn when he killed Wendy Baribolt. Once he was seated in the police interview room, Ross was soon rambling about his life to the amiable cop. By now, Malchik was privately convinced that he had a serial killer sitting in front of him. But in the bustling confines of the command post, obtaining a full confession was another matter entirely. At one point, just as Ross was about to make some serious admissions, a cleaner burst into the room and started to mop the floor. This unexpected intrusion broke the spell, and Malchik had to begin coaxing his suspect again. Suddenly, Ross asked, "Mike, do you think I killed Wendy?" Malchik said that he believed so, and with that, Ross admitted 11 sexual assaults and 6 murders. Recalling that first meeting during a subsequent prison interview, Ross said, "I remember the detective coming to the door. He was looking for a blue hatchback with wipers, and I didn't have a blue hatchback. I had a blue sedan with no wipers, and he was getting ready to leave, and I told him something. I don't remember exactly what I said, but something that made him pause, and he said he had better ask me a few more questions, and then afterwards he was getting ready to go, and I said something else, so I guess I didn't really want him to leave." Remembering the interview with Mike Malchik, Ross explained, "You know, it's not exactly the easiest thing in the world to do. You know, hello, Mr. Police Officer, I killed a load of people. You know, it was hard for me. If you actually listened to the audio tape confessions, it was very difficult for me to admit that I did it. And then I had one got out. Then he would have to kind of get the next one out. Then I could talk about that one. Yes, it was hard at first saying I killed this one or that one. I mean, I told them about 2 they didn't know about. I mean, they didn't even question me about them because they thought they were runaways." When I asked Ross why he had confessed to the murders of April, Brunet, and Leslie Shelley, when he hadn't even been asked about them, the killer complained, "Well, the police said that there was something wrong with me, and there was a place called Whiting for insane criminals. Yeah, I fell for that one, and I thought I was going to get the help I needed, and that's what I wanted to hear. Hey, you know you have got something wrong with you, and we are going to do something about it, 'cause the murders have stopped." Yeah, Malchik said all the right things, so I thought, what the hell, and I gave him everything. To be fair to Mike Malchik, he did honor his promise to Ross, for the murders did stop, and the law eventually did something about Ross's problem. If possible, they would execute him. Windham County Prosecutor Harry Goucher only charged Ross with the 1982 murders of Tammy Williams and Deborah Smith Taylor. Whether it was because of lack of physical evidence to support the rape portion of an aggravated capital felony charge, which carried the death sentence, or Goucher's anxiety about losing his case at trial, he allowed Ross to plead guilty solely to murder. Sitting on Saturday, the 13th of December, 1986, the trial judge sentenced Ross to 2 consecutive life terms. He would serve no less than 120 years behind bars. However, the murders of Wendy Barabol, Robin Stavinsky, April Brunet, and Leslie Shelley fell under the jurisdiction of a more tenacious prosecutor. New London County State's Attorney C. Robert Bulldog Sadi of the Hang'em and Whipham Brigade wanted to be the first prosecutor for decades to send a murderer to Connecticut's electric chair. Sadi also knew that he was up against a death penalty statute that tipped the balance in favor of life imprisonment, but the counsel stuck to his guns, for he strongly believed that if ever there was a man worthy of the chair, it had to be Michael Bruce Ross. Apart from the morality of executing a man in liberal Connecticut, there was another cost to consider. Old Sparky had not been used since Joseph Mad Dog Taborski had been electrocuted in it on Tuesday, the 17th of May, 1960, since which time it had fallen into disrepair. If they wanted to kill Michael Ross, the state would have to pay out at least $30,000 to make the chair serviceable, and redecorate the witness viewing area and death house suite. For their part, the defense attorneys had to convince a jury that Ross was not legally responsible for the crimes to which he had confessed. Making their job tougher was the fact that Ross didn't qualify for an insanity defense. Moreover, the case had received so much pre-trial publicity that in the summer of 1987, the venue was moved to Bridgeport, where the prosecution would argue that Ross was a rapist, a cold-blooded calculating monster who had planned his assaults and murdered his victims simply to stay out of prison. In June 1987, after 4 weeks of testimony, the 8 men and 4 women of the jury took just 87 minutes to convict Ross of capital felony murder. At the penalty phase, 3 weeks later, it took them under 4 hours to prove that Connecticut's death sentence could be imposed. On Monday, the 6th of July, 20 days before his 28th birthday, Ross was condemned to death. Under Connecticut law, he would have been spared this sentence if the court had found even one redeeming factor or quality that the jurors believed to indicate remorse or mitigation. They could not, for Ross, it seemed, did not have a conscience and didn't give a damn. Ross explained to me that he is not afraid of dying in the electric chair. He says that living is too good for him, but he is worried that if that fateful day does arrive, he will say the wrong thing or show weakness in the face of death. He is also afraid of something he says is worse than death. I've always felt that I had to be in control of myself, and even to this day, I feel the need to be in control. What scares me the most isn't life in prison or the death penalty, but insanity. I'm scared of losing touch with reality. Sometimes I feel I'm slipping away and I'm losing control. If you are in control, you can handle anything, but if you lose it, you are nothing. When asked if he had any feelings or remorse for his crimes, he replied bluntly, "Nope, I don't feel anything for them. I really wish I did. I don't feel anything. I feel really bad for the families. I feel lots of times like I can see Mrs. Shelley, the mother of one of them girls I killed, on the witness stand crying, and then there's Mrs. I can't remember her name, but I can think of another one on the stand describing her daughter. She went to the morgue and saw her at the morgue, but the girls themselves I feel nothing for, and I never have." Ross then explained why he hadn't turned himself into the police when he started to commit his earlier offenses, way back at Cornell University, when he knew he needed help. "I made myself believe that it would never happen again, and I know it sounds hard, but looking back, I can't understand how I did it. It was a fluke because I really didn't do those things. Even sitting here now, I know if I was released I'd kill again. There's no reason to think otherwise, but I can't. As I sit here now, picture myself wanting to do that. I can't really see myself doing it. It's like being on different levels." When asked if he had any detailed memories of the murders, Ross chuckled and then said, "Yes and no. I used to fantasize over the crimes every day and every night. I would masturbate to the point of, actually having raw spots on myself from the masturbation. I would bleed. It's weird. I get a lot of pleasure from it. It is really a pleasurable experience. But when it's all over, it's a very short-term thing. I guess it's like getting high. You know, I've never used drugs, but you can get high. Then you come down and crash. That's almost how it is. It's just not any easy thing to live with. An inevitable question was to ask him what had been going through his mind when he was raping and killing his tragic victims. His reply was, nothing. But after a moment's reflection, he added, that's what's so weird about this thing. Everybody seems to think, the state's theory that I'm a rapist and I kill them so they can't identify me. Look, most of the time, it's broad daylight. I mean, I'm not a stupid person. As sure as hell, if I was going to do something like that, I sure as hell wouldn't do it that way. There was nothing going through my mind until they were already dead. And then it was like stepping through a doorway. And I remember the very first feeling I had was my heart beating. I mean, really pounding. The second feeling I had was that my hands hurt, where I always strangled them with my hands. And the third feeling was, I guess, fear. And the kind of reality set in that there was this dead body in front of me. And again, I don't want to mislead you because I knew what was going on, but it was like a different level. I mean, it was like watching it. And after it was all over, it kinds of sets in. And that's when I would get frightened and stuff. I would hide the bodies and cover them up or something. Ross lives in his death row cell, which is truly an ancient dungeon painted a muddy brown color. Death row is stamped in white stencil on the steel door leading to the tier, which houses Connecticut's 7 condemned men. On my final visit to the prison, only Ross and Robert Breton were at home. Cedric Cobb, Ivo Colon, Richard Reynolds, Todd Rizzo, and Daniel Webb were enjoying fresh air in the exercise yard and taking in a little sun. Ross is proud of his cell. It is piled high with books and writing materials. Indeed, he boasts about the fact that he has been allocated a second cell where even more of his books are stored. Michael also brags about the dozens of pretty young women who court his attentions, one of whom is as pretty as a starlet, and has even signed her photograph with love. Her letters show that she would marry him in a flash, but he would probably kill her in an instant. Michael Ross is not unique among the serial killer breed, but to his credit, he is struggling to understand why he was driven to commit such terrible crimes on young women. Indeed, he is striving to understand the forces that propelled him into such severe antisocial behavior in the first place. To this end, he volunteered for a series of treatment, which includes chemical and surgical castration, the latter being refused by the state. Many acknowledged experts seem to believe that this treatment could separate the beast from the decent Michael Ross, and for an extended period, he was prescribed Depo-Provera to reduce his enormous sex drive. At the same time as he was taking this drug, he was being prescribed Prozac, a powerful antidepressant, and this cocktail certainly reduced his abnormal sexual desires. Unfortunately, excessive use of Depo-Provera ballooned his weight by several stone, and, as a result, he suffered pathological changes in liver function and hormone levels, and his depression reappeared. Before these drugs were prescribed, Ross claims he masturbated constantly. Occasionally, when in the company of a female correctional officer, he experienced an overwhelming desire to kill her. The Depo-Provera reduced his sex drive, and Michael said, "You know that everybody has had a tune playing over and over again inside their heads, and if you have this tune that plays all day over and over, it can drive you nuts. And just imagine having thoughts of rape and murder, and you can't get rid of it. Well, just like the tune, it'll be driving you nuts. No matter what you do to get rid of that tune, it's going to stay in your head. And that's how I am. I don't want these thoughts. Asked if he thought this tune was, in reality, the monster, he replied, "No, I think he's separate. He goes to sleep for a while and, you never know where he's gone." And that's very true. I mean, sometimes he's there, and especially with the Depot Provera, I can feel him back here. Ross touched the back of his head. I don't know how anybody is going to understand this, but he used to be always in front of my mind, and always intruding like an obnoxious roommate, always butting into your business, and you can't get rid of him.